Core competencies matter in leadership, and we're talking about that today on the Church Revitalization Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malfers Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and A.J. Mathieu.
Welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name is Scott Ball. I'm joined by my friend and co-host, A.J. Mathieu.
Good morning.
All right, A.J., we are continuing our Not a series on Leadership Pipeline, deep dive, and we're talking about core competencies for leadership. So just to recap us very briefly so far. So far in this Not a series, we've talked about why every church needs a leadership pipeline. Last week, we talked about defining levels of leadership. So when we look at what a leadership pipeline is, I encourage you to go back to Exodus chapter 18, verse 24, where Jethro says to Moses, "Look for able men from all the people, men who fear God, are trustworthy, and hate a bribe, and place such men over the people as chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, and fifties, and tens." So in that verse, we see the components of what a leadership pipeline is. Last week, we talked about the idea of a leadership structure or levels of leadership, which is where Jethro's talking about place such men over the leaders, chiefs of thousands, hundreds, fifties, tens. We got these plus Moses. So we have these 5 levels. This week, I'm going to scale back and look at the first part of that verse, which is where he says, "Look for able men from all the people, men who fear God, are trustworthy, and hate a bribe." And these are competencies or core competencies for leadership. Now, one thing I want to point out, AJ, before we go too far, is that those competencies, which are defined at the beginning of the verse, are applied or implied for every level. So the idea of being able, fear God, trustworthy, hate a bribe, these 4 things that Jethro defines, it's implied that this is necessary to be a chief of 10 or to be a chief of thousands.
Yeah.
And so what we're going to talk about today is what's at play here. How do we scale that? What does that mean? What does it mean to be a chief of tens or a level 1 leader versus a chief of thousands, or like a level 4 or level 5 leader? And how do we take these core competencies and extrapolate them at different levels? So I would encourage you, if you've not listened to the previous 2 episodes, start there first. It will make this episode make more sense. But today we're talking about core competencies for leadership. And this is really a critical component, in my view, of making a pipeline work.
Yeah. Adding this level of consistency to the pipeline greatly increases your ability to manage it, because we're not just leaving it up to this person is this way, this job is kind of like that or like this. And I think when you kind of get down into it and you're wrestling with each level and with the positions in the church, I think you find when you put the work in that you can have consistency. There are certain levels of competency regarding people's capacity in the level and their character that you can be consistent. And so, that objectivity that it brings to the management of the system, to coaching later, to helping people to move up from one level to the next. This is a structural component to a leadership pipeline.
Right. So I think the best way for us to start then is at the beginning and ask this question: what exactly are core competencies? We've been dancing around this, but let me be really clear. Core competencies are very simply the qualifications required to serve at each level of leadership. I like to say that they are the thing that distinguishes leaders from non-leaders. So we all have this subjective experience. When I work with the church one-on-one, I'll often say this. I'll give this metaphorical example. If your church were to host some sort of an event, let's say you're a church that in October you have some sort of a fall festival or a trunk or treat or some sort of fall themed event or autumn themed if you're in a place that uses the term autumn instead of fall. if you have some event like that, would you place, AJ, at your church, would you place an 11-year-old boy in charge of running that event?
Hmm. It would have to be a highly competent young man. Likely not.
No, no, you wouldn't. You wouldn't do it. And the question is why? Why wouldn't you put an 11-year-old boy? I'm serious. AJ, answer this question. Why would you not put an 11-year-old boy in charge of running that event?
Yeah, right. There would probably be too high an emphasis on candy. Yeah, it would the wrong priorities would be made. Yeah.
Yeah, well, not only that, but they wouldn't know how much candy do you need?
Yeah.
They would either vastly overestimate that or underestimate that. There would be no volunteers there because they don't know how to recruit people. There would be no structure to the event because they don't have any way of planning. You just, in your brain, you go, well, duh, of course I wouldn't ask an 11-year-old boy to coordinate this event. That's obvious. It's obvious that that 11-year-old is not a qualified leader to put
Hmm.
together an event like that. Now, here's the follow-up to this. If I said, who can run this event for you? And we know not him, but who could?
Yeah.
Now, in your brain, and every person I know who's ever worked on staff and leadership, they are sorting people in their
Yeah.
mind.
Right.
Who could do this? And whether you know it or not, you have competencies for leadership that you have these categories in your brain
Hmm.
and you're thinking through who fits in that. Now, here's the problem with that. It's totally subjective. Who you think might be good, there might be some Venn diagram of overlap between who you think would be good and who someone else thinks would be good. But that doesn't get you anywhere closer to identifying somebody. And here's the worst part of that is that I, as a leader, I have no ability to grow up into that kind of leader who could run an event like that if the expectations for leadership required at that level are not explicit.
Hmm.
How can I become a leader like that if I don't know what it takes to be a leader like that?
Yeah.
And so core competencies define the difference between leaders and non-leaders, and they give a track for people to run on in order to become a more effective leader from level to level. So that's
Yeah.
what core competencies are.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I love most about this is the ability for people to have right expectations. Because so much of our experience in, growing up in churches and having various positions that we serve in is kind of the unknown, just not knowing things. And it's, um, you say this a lot, Scott. I accredit this to you. Clear is kind. When you're
I
when
didn't
you're
invent that. I think that's a Brené Brown.
is it
Yeah,
well
clarity is kindness or something like that.
but it's true, I mean, when people know what to expect, I mean, you're extending kindness to them by helping match expectations. And I think that's really good when we can bring some level of objectivity, even if it's maybe developed somewhat subjectively. At least we become unified around subjective things to elevate them to an objective level, so that we know what we're going to be looking for, what we're going to be coaching people up in, what we expect of them, and that they know then. Like, okay, this is an area that I can improve in because I have aspirations to do something maybe bigger than this.
That's right. So I think then kind of moving on to the second point here, the role of core competencies. I think we've probably covered this.
Yeah.
I kind of jumped ahead a little bit, but I want to be really clear and just say this. Um, the role of core competencies is to bring objectivity, as you just said, to something that is otherwise totally subjective. And it enables you can coach people up to standards that are articulated. You cannot coach people up to be more competent in something that you're not even sure what competency looks like.
Yeah.
How so it helps both the individual leader to know what to aspire to. It also helps the higher level leaders bring people up or coach people up because they have a standard to coach them up to. And so it helps on both ends of that spectrum. And so if you've ever been in a situation where you think, man, I just don't see high quality leaders. Have you ever defined what a high quality leader looks like?
Mm-hmm.
And if you haven't, why would you be surprised that you don't see high quality leaders. Because even if you've got some sort of leadership development process in place, AJ, if you don't have standards for that leadership, then everybody who is in the role of a developer is developing the people under them to the standard that exists in their own mind
Yeah.
and not something that is shared across the church.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit like how we talk about vision. There's usually a lot more overlap and shared understanding than we would know, but you still have to articulate it so that you actually gain momentum. If you don't say it, then it can't be understood and you can't build towards it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of unknowns in the world. There's a lot of things we don't know, but when we can find areas in which we can bring definitions to, it brings an element of predictability for us in outcomes. Which again, the big picture in the church is that we're developing people, we're discipling people to become disciple makers. So the
Mhm.
better we can, as leaders, have some predictability in that our actions will produce something desirable in other people, then we're shortcutting the process to people increasing in maturity and making disciples of Jesus. We see this in other discipleship areas of the church, in small groups or Sunday school or other ministry areas. We're like, we want predictable outcomes. We want to see people thrive, and this is just another one of those spaces to have something like that could be helpful. So okay,
Yep.
so defining our core competencies. We need to
Mhm.
have we can't just let this now become completely open-ended. And so, as with a lot of things that we attempt to bring some structure into the church, like discipleship pathway, we just don't want endless and endless ministries with no point. With our core competencies, we're talking about 6 to 8 core competencies. So we've put some restrictions on this so that we can focus on what would be most important.
Yeah, so let me go back to Exodus 18 for just a moment. So in Exodus 18, Jethro says, look for able men, that men who fear God, who are trustworthy and hate a bribe. So you can think of Jethro as defining two kinds of competencies. The first one is just that he just lists one, and it's able men. And the word able is doing a lot in this verse in the original Hebrew. That word that's translated there as able is sometimes um, translated as just straight up as money,
Mhm.
and other places as power. So think of this as influence. So look at people with influence, people who can get things done. So the idea is this is a capacity competency, the ability to do something, to get things done. So leaders get things done. They're able to effectuate change. They're able, they can problem solve. They can strategize. They can develop vision. They can manage resources. These are all things that would fall under that able category that's assumed by Jethro. I would encourage you to be more specific. So pick 3 or 4 things within this category of capacity or skill. What makes a leader a leader? For me, I'm generally going to pick something around problem solving, something around strategy, something around people skills like emotional intelligence or people management or something like that. And maybe one other that you might go, this is important. Communication. That would be another one that's really key.
Yeah.
Communication is a skill, right? Um, and then he says, men who fear God, who are trustworthy and hate a bribe. And these are character competencies. These are character thing. They are competencies associated with the kind of person that they are. So you want to select another 3 or 4 things that it fall into this category. Maybe things like spiritual maturity, or things like humility, or integrity, or teachability, or there's any number of things you could select. But what would be the 3 or 4 things that you would say all leaders at their core, in their character, these are the things that are essential to leadership? And every church is going to define these things differently. When you work with the Malthus group, we take you through a whole process to discover what are the core competencies for your church and help you to develop that. But then you want to look at scaling that, AJ. This is the key.
Mhm.
So we're going to keep these same categories, but then we're going to scale that competency appropriately for each level of leadership. So what does communication, for example, look like at level 1 versus communication, the skill or competency of communication at level 5? That
Yeah.
looks way different. So then someone can cultivate that skill or competency over time. Same thing with the character as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, communication, just to kind of build the example out slightly, the communication for your level one greeter or usher is, maybe physically speaking clearly. Can people understand when you're saying, hey, good morning? Are they pleasant? Do they communicate pleasantly? Very, very simplistic area of communication versus a staff person that needs to communicate detailed tasks to people in an understandable way, or an elder that needs to communicate doctrine and scripture in a clearly understandable way. So yeah, there are these things can scale. It might take a minute to sit there to process this a little bit and think about how the differences would be.
Yeah, when I'm consulting with a church on leadership pipeline, this is one of the questions I ask because they might select some particular competency and they go, oh, this is really important. And I go, okay, I can see how that is important, but does that scale from level 1 to 5? And so sometimes we might identify a skill that they think is very important, but rather than making it its own category, we're going to weave that idea a maybe into problem solving at the level 3 level. Like for example, they might say, I don't know, managing resources. I'm just giving an example. All right, well, managing resources, I mean, if I really tried, I could make that work at all 5 levels. But a level 1 leader, we're not asking them to manage resources maybe more than their own time. I mean, I guess that's something.
Yeah.
But, I only got 3 or 4 categories. This is the one I want to use. Whereas I could maybe talk about how managing resources becomes really vital starting at level 3, being able to, or at level 4 where I'm putting together a budget. So, taking a competency or a skill and then weaving it into one other category. And this is kind of in the weeds, but this is the value of working with someone through this process is, we can help you think through what are our main buckets and then these
Mm-hmm.
extra things that we think are important. How can we make sure that they are evidenced in this whole chart we put together?
Yeah, so let me pull back the curtain in another area that people maybe are thinking about, and they're like, "Gosh, Scott and AJ, 6 to 8 is very restrictive." Our church came up with we've got 11 character things, and we've got 8 capacity things, and the reason that's not a good idea is because you're holding yourself to us this standard now going forward.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in your coaching and your evaluation processes going forward this becomes too much to manage for people at like level 3 and up in your coaching and development process. When you're like, oh my gosh, I've got all of this stuff that I'm trying to keep track of these individuals that are working in my team, and so
Yeah.
it would set you up into a position where later you're gonna be like, oh, this is just too much. And maybe we're just not even going to think about those things at all anymore. Or eventually you would probably come back to something that is a little bit more manageable.
Which leads to kind of a principle here before we move on to the last main section, um, is that we only promote leaders to the next level of leadership when they exhibit strength in all of our core competencies. So that's making the case for not having 20 different categories. If you have 20 different categories, it may be almost impossible to go, yep, they check all 20 of these boxes right now. So by keeping it 6 to 8, it's a little more manageable. And of course, you're making a judgment call. So it's impossible to know maybe until someone gets into a level of leadership, do they really have all of these skills? But as best as you can judge, we're trying to avoid that Peter principle of elevating people to the level of their incompetence. We want to be sure that we're only elevating people when we are reasonably sure that they have the competency to thrive at that next level. So when you have too many, it becomes unwieldy and unmanageable to judge whether or not they would be effective. When it's a reasonable number, you can be more certain that they're going to thrive
Yeah.
at that level.
Yeah. All right. So our next sort of a caveat, but something that needs to be mentioned is that in various positions in the church, or maybe at different levels, there might be some proprietary things, some skills required in a particular ministry area. And so there's
Right.
allowances for that within this framework as well. The obvious one would be worship team members. Not
Mhm.
everybody needs to be able to play drums, but the drummer needs to be able to play drums. And
Right.
so there's room here for specific ministry skills in addition to the 6 to 8 character capacity competencies.
Yeah. You can have different skills and also different character things. So we talked about, I think it was in last week's episode where we chatted about security guards. You know, a security guard, that's a really important job. And so to go, should we just make it level one? Like it feels like it should be higher than level one. Well, yes and no. I mean, it they aren't spiritually leading others. You know, and level two is leading others. They're not really doing that. They're protecting others. And it's important, but it's not really leading others. That they're protecting others. And so it's really more of a level one responsibility. But you said, Scott Ball, in that a level one leader is any old schmo can for the most part. Okay, so how do we guard against any old schmo getting on our security team, but also recognize that it's not a level two responsibility? You can do this, you can achieve this by adding some specific ministry specific competencies. For example, they may have to go through special onboarding training. They may have to attend some sort of training that's associated with your insurance. They may need to have a concealed carry permit. They mean you by the time you add three or four things, they may have to go through some sort of a safe space training and clear a background check. By the time
Mhm.
you've layered on these three or four competencies specific to or qualifications specific to this role, you've weeded out the riffraff while not elevating the role to a level that it isn't.
Yeah,
So you can almost screen out people who shouldn't fit without changing its level, if that makes sense.
yeah, yeah.
Another example of this, kind of a different kind of example, AJ, is elders or key board members. You might be thinking, wow, just three or four character things. That's all we're going to judge our elders on. Like, shouldn't it be way harder than that to qualify to be an elder? Yes. So you may have 10 or 12. I'm not going to give you a number because it's going to vary from church to church, but you may have 10 different character things
Yeah,
associated with that role on top of the three or four that you've already defined
yeah.
as part of the pipeline.
But there's some
So
biblical
that you're
standards, obviously, that
some
come into
biblical
play.
standards there. Yeah, yeah. And there may be other things that you decide upon as well. And that's all right. You can layer that on top of. The question is, what is core or central to all leadership at every level?
Yeah,
That's what we're targeting in the core competencies. And then you can layer on top of that things that are specific to the role or specific even to the level in the case of an elder. And that's totally inbounds to do that. But we've got, think of it as like we've got cake in the middle, and then we can add icing.
mm,
Uh, and so the core competency is the cake, and then these ministry specific competencies are the icing that you might layer on top of it.
mm. Now you get me wanting some cake. That sounds pretty good. All right. So okay, so let's just recap today. Competencies for leadership positions in the church. This is a vital piece to any leadership pipeline design that you're going to try to put in place. Because you need these necessary, you gotta keep things between the rails. We need to bring a level of objectivity to the church in having levels of leadership that we know people are the right fit for, and in the capacity and character qualities of these people in these positions, so that we can help them develop into positions that they aspire to, and in the needs of the church. Yeah, we highly encourage you to consider having this level of structure in your volunteer and staff positions in your church.
Yeah.
And you know what, Scott? I think when they're hearing this, I'm going to be out of the country and helping some church teams in Asia work through implementing this in their church. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
I just want to drop that little thing. If
Sure.
you would be interested in supporting that trip or others that we have coming up, go to malfirstgroup.com/donate right now,
Mhm.
and read more about our big funding initiative called Operation Gideon, and you can help participate in that. But yeah, we're bringing this into Asia here in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, that's right. Um, this is really important. And this was a lot shorter episode than last week's episode, but um, I wanted to make sure that it got attention on its own
Mhm.
because this is a uh, maybe just a topic that you haven't thought much about or haven't defined, or you've thought about it but you don't have anything written down. And I would encourage you. This is not just part of a pipeline to be considered. It's an integral part to leadership. Whether
Mhm.
you integrate a pipeline or not, understanding the difference between a leader and a non-leader and articulating that for your church is really important. So there's even more information in today's article. So if you go to malfersgroup.com/243, you can read that. Also, if you want to learn more about the leadership pipeline process, if you're listening to all this and going, wow, this is all really good. This non-series series has been helpful, but I would like some help. You can find the leadership pipeline page on our website as well, or just reach out to us, email us leadership@malfirstgroup.com and get connected to us. We'd love to chat with you about taking your church through our pipeline process.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Next week, we're going to be talking about leadership, non-series series. Come back and join us again. Thanks, guys.
So
See
yeah.
you.